With the new Pikachu movie on the rise and the recent release of Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, what better time to unearth some more creepypastas for you, because you guys seem to aggressively love them. Hey guys, welcome back to Top 10 Gaming, I'm your host Lucy McPhee, bringing you the top 10 scary Pikachu creepypastas. If you're a fan of Pokemon, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another gaming vid. Okay, let's jump in. In at 10, Mad Pikachu. This creepypasta begins with two friends playing Pokemon Stadium on an N64. They played all night until the friend had to go home. The next day the boy called his friend asking if he wanted to play Pokemon Stadium again, but the friend said he wanted to play something else, so the boy went over, taking his N64 and Pokemon Pikachu Special Edition with him. He proposed a challenge that they had to collect 6 Pikachus, and then the game would end. The friend agreed. Shockingly, the friend caught all 6. The boy was surprised. It grew late and the boy went home, taking his N64 and the cartridge with him. He opened his friend's save file, seeing the 6 Pikachus. They had gradually began to evolve, one by one. Slowly, they started to emerge out of the television, taking on a disturbing form. The boy tried to run, but the Pikachus attacked him, dismembering the boy. The next morning, the boy's parents went into his room. He was nowhere to be seen, however the N64 was still on and blood was spilling out from the TV. A word began to emerge on the screen. It just read, "Mad." In at 9, Death the Pikachu. This creepypasta begins with a user playing Pokemon Red on an emulator. They named their character Death for some odd reason, but when the game loaded they weren't the character they were supposed to be. Instead they were Pikachu. They figured it was a glitch. The Pikachu was fat with a slightly different tail and ears. There was also red blood in the room he was in. He went outside. Death had an exclamation point over their head, but the player couldn't control anything. They noticed the music wasn't right either. They were in Pallet Town, but the music was from Lavender Town, only it was reversed. Text then appeared. It read, "Run away, leave, go." The player had no choice and continued on, engaging in a handful of Pokemon battles along the way. In one, a Rattata had organs coming out of its stomach and its eyes were black holes. The player very easily knocked it out with a move called Knife Slash. The animation was a knife cutting across the enemy with the blood pooling out. As his player Death reached level 6, they had unlocked a new move, Blood Bite. He used it in a battle and to his surprise it was a move that kills. Freaked out, he continued on anyway. He then reached a place called Flesh City. Immediately he saw a sign that read, "Run away, it's dangerous," and "Die." More and more signs kept popping up. "Please Death, live for me. Don't let them get you, you're getting warmer. Go back. No, keep going." The player went on. Blood stains were all over the trees, and he eventually reached an area where Viridian Forest should have been, but instead the sign read, "I warned you," and in front of it was a black Pikachu. It said, "Death, is that you? That is you. Die." It then attacked it, killing the player. Blood pooled out everywhere before the screen faded to game over. In at 8, Snow on Mount Silver. This creepypasta tells the tale of two brothers who had an unfortunate encounter with a hacked Pokemon game. Our author of this story, the older brother, remembers walking into his sibling's room to see him lying on the floor in tears. His Game Boy Advance and hacked version of Pokemon Blue smashed at his feet. His brother would tell him in a distorted panic that all he saw was white everywhere, and then everything went black. His brother was committed to the psych ward at their local hospital. When he came down from all the drugs in his system, he asked his brother to throw out all of the hacked cartridges. At home, curious, he picked up their hacked copy of Pokemon Silver and popped it into his Game Boy to give it a look. The two had a long history of hacking games using their Game Shark, and up until then it had only provided hours and hours of joy. He found a notebook with a bunch of Game Shark codes in his brother's room, with only one left visible that hadn't been viciously scratched out. Next to it was the writing, "Easter egg, Snow on Mount Silver." The game was odd when he started it up. It said that his brother had almost completed his entire Pokedex, and the sprites of the Pokemon in his roster seemed washed out, sullen almost. The game brought him to Mount Silver, but every time he tried to go elsewhere the player character would repeat, "I can't run, I can't go back down, I can never go back." So he continued to climb the mountain. He got a little further and the player's sprite stopped, with the words "I'm cold" popping up on the screen. He climbed further, As he continued to climb one by one, all of the Pokemon in his roster died. By the time he reached the top, the snow in the game had stopped falling, and to his surprise, a Celebi sat there on the summit. The battle began. Each time he tried to use a Pokemon, they would appear zombified and die immediately. That's when all of the Pokemon flashed upon his screen, looking grotesque, smiling sinisterly. That's when the most absurd thing happened. Across the screen, the words "Use Destiny Bond" flashed. A horrible screech echoed out of the Game Boy. The player felt ill. All he saw was white, then black. Coming to his senses, he threw out the game and never played a hack game ever again. In at 7, Pikachu's Rage. This creepypasta is about a player that had Pokemon Yellow and was a big fan of Pikachu. As a child, he didn't really care for him as much and abandoned him in his box because he didn't want to evolve. Years passed and he eventually forgot about the game, but feeling nostalgic, he ended up finding his old copy of Pokemon Yellow. He put it in his Game Boy Advance and turned it on. Everything was normal until Pikachu appeared, who instead of happy-go-lucky seemed confused, before turning into a scowl. The player was weirded out by this, but hit start anyway and decided to continue the game he had abandoned years ago. He opened up the box he had left Pikachu in, but he wasn't there. He came to the conclusion that it must have been a glitch and continued playing the game without him. He was in the middle of battling the first of the Elite Four when he heard a low groan coming from the game. It sounded like Pikachu. He thought it weird but continued his battle and eventually won. A text box then appeared. You left him behind to die. He never did anything wrong, yet you still treated him like he was nothing. How does it feel to know that he died because of you? The player was still freaked out but continued, eventually reaching the room where the last of the Elite Four were. He won, but as before a text box appeared reading, well now he's going to show you. Show us all what it feels like to be rejected by those you care about. The screen then faded and the champion room opened. He entered, meeting up with his rival Blue, but the dialogue was not what he expected. He said, so even through all of this, all that you've seen and been told, you're still pushing forward. You don't even know what you did, do you? A choice box appeared with yes and no. The player clicked yes. Blue then yelled, liar. Then a thunderbolt sound was heard. Blue continued, do you hear that? Did you hear another get roasted alive by his anger? Well now that's left is to get to me. Once I make you black out, I'll be able to save myself from the same fate as them. The battle then began. The player defeated Blue and Blue said one final thing before disappearing. No, I'm next. I'm not ready to die. The screen then faded to black and a figure appeared. A level 255 ghost. It was Pikachu. It slayed the player's entire team. A text box then appeared. And now that I've taken away the two things that denied me my happiness, I'm gonna show you what it's like to be alone. The player's character then got sucked into the black void. It was all alone. Pikachu appeared again. Do you like it? This is what you left me with when you left me behind to die. An empty darkness that I'll never be able to escape from, and neither will you. I'm going to make you suffer. Suffer for what you did to me, for what I was denied. And when you're in agony, just remember this was all your fault. The game then crashed. In at 6, My First Pikachu. This creepypasta comes to us from Kirby64. They describe how they had purchased a cartridge labeled Pika Yellow version from a game shop. The game was pretty much like any other Pokemon game. It started up normally, they played it for a few weeks and it had some cool mechanics, like the options to play, praise, or scold your Pikachu, almost like a Tamagotchi. The Pikachu would react to its treatment, being upset if it was scolded, even turning on the player midway through the Pokemon Tower, causing him to black out and wind up back at the Pokemon Center. He left the game for a long time, eventually down the line returning to it. He started it up, but it severely glitched out, forcing him to restart it 6 or 7 times. He knew something was wrong immediately though. The game loaded up, but this time he was in Lavender Town, and his Pikachu was nowhere to be found. He wasn't even in the player's party. Every time he spoke to an NPC, they would say it looks like Pikachu wants something or have you played with Pikachu lately? Figuring it was some sort of event in the game, the player went to the Lavender Volunteer Pokemon House where lost Pokemon were taken care of. This is where he found Pikachu, who ran up to him expectantly. 3 options were given to the player: praise, scold, or gift. He selected praise. Pikachu's stats had changed again. It was marked as lonely now. Assuming this was just another mechanic in the game to make the player feel more involved, they thought nothing of it. Every time they got into a battle, Pikachu would act strangely, flinching and becoming confused out of nowhere. That's when things got weird. Pikachu started to learn moves on its own, disobeying the orders the player was trying to implement in the game. Pikachu Pikachu learned a move called Shadow Rush on its own. During their next battle, the player gave Shadow Rush a try, which turned out to be super effective on every Pokemon. As the player progressed in the game, Pikachu became more outlandish. It started to use moves that would harm other Pokemon in the player's roster. When the player looked online to try to find answers as to why Pikachu was doing this, he found nothing. He shared his story on a few blogs and everyone thought he was making it up. Finally, the player decided to take things further and managed to find the contact info of someone who worked at Game Freak, sending them a detailed message describing Pikachu's erratic behavior. To their surprise, the player got a message back that read, "I got your message, let's talk." The Game Freak employee asked him a lot of questions, ones that sounded really ominous. Eventually the employee stopped messaging the player back, the deeper the player got into telling them his story. 2 weeks went by and the player got a strange message from the central director of Game Freak, asking if they could set up a meeting with them. When they went into their offices to speak to them, the police were present. One of the officers told the player that a report had been filed, claiming that they were in possession of stolen property, and if they returned the game, there would be no charges. Confused, they handed over the game and the police told them not to say anything since the game was part of an ongoing investigation. They tried reaching out to the Game Freak employee again but discovered they had been blocked by them. Years later they would see a similar looking cartridge to the one they had played show up on eBay. Someone out there won that auction and the player knew they would have a very interesting game on their hands. In at 5, Lonely Pikachu. Now this one is just sad. Our list is already long enough, so I'm going to try and sum this up very briefly. The author, Sasha, details how they had bought Pokemon Yellow 10 years ago, and after completing the game, one of their friends told them a trick to catch a Marill. I quote, "Restart the game, play only with Pikachu, and after defeating the Council of 4, use a stone water on Pikachu." Except this Pikachu didn't follow his master. They were going to switch out their Pikachu, but our author didn't want to. Pikachu started to have a somber expression, almost sad. Later the author explains that when she was in college, she jumped back into playing Pokemon, feeling nostalgic for the game she once loved. However, things weren't quite right. She stumbled across a grave in tall grass. It read, "Here lies Pikachu, abandoned by Sasha 12 years ago. Death of loneliness." You can find the full story in the description below. In at 4, Pikachu Scream. This creepypasta comes from author Miss Insane. She describes how she found a Pokemon Yellow cartridge at a flea market. However, she spotted something behind the vendor that caught her eye. It looked familiar. She asked the vendor if she could take a look, but he appeared frightened, giving it to her and stating, "You should never play it. It should never be released into the world." He gave it to her for free and she left. She got home and immediately popped in the cartridge. She was 2 hours deep into the game. She had collected a Pikachu, but he was acting strange. He seemed unhappy, almost depressed. It then made a deafening scream and the game crashed. The player took an aspirin and then passed out on the couch. She had visions she saw herself walking through a city and came across Pikachu, who was acting the same way as in the game, depressed. He began to cry before screaming and then dropping dead. Villagers then began to gather around, stating, "You should have saved him. He never deserved it." She abruptly woke up. She noticed a Game Boy was on, Pokemon Yellow. Her character spawned inside of Pokemon Tower. The villagers were once again saying the same things as in her dream. "You should have saved him. He never deserved it." They walked upstairs, but the graves that were usually there were now gone. There was now an interaction option though. The player clicked on it. Text appeared that read, "Here lies Trainer Matt's Pikachu." Shocked, the player tore out the game and smashed the cartridge. They went to bed but had yet another creepy vision. The trainer was kneeling in the grass next to their Pikachu. Tears were in the trainer's eyes as they said goodbye to their dead friend. The next day the player got back from work. On their table was their Game Boy. The cartridge they had smashed was in it, and the screen had some text on it that read, "Goodbye forever, Pikachu." In at 3, Pikachu. This creepypasta begins with our player reminiscing about an old Pokemon game they played with their brother on the N64, called Hey You Pikachu. It was a game that you had to play with a mic as it required you to roleplay and interact with Pikachu. They hunted down the game and found a mic, and thus begins the story. There was no save file on it, so they deleted it, opting to start a new game. He met Pikachu and then Professor Oak. Forgetting he was mic'd up, he said, "Yeah, whatever Oak, go away." Oak stood there, taken aback, and then eventually went away. He reached a level in the game where your Pikachu has to hunt for some ingredients. He spoke into the mic, "Let's go find those ingredients." Pikachu went on his way, hunting for all the things on their list before encountering a dark purple mushroom. He looked at the player and then ate it before the player could object. The game then froze with the Pikachu looking sick, and then a barcode appeared over his head. Weirded out, the player turned off the game and blew on the cartridge, summing it up as an in-game error. It restarted and everything was normal, at first. The next few levels, Pikachu began to act out, not following the player's orders and disappearing to opposite ends of the map. and refusing to come back when called. The player's brother said this would sometimes happen, but one day Pikachu went missing. Professor Oak then appeared saying that he had run off to Viridian Forest and had taken Pokehelper with him. The player went to the forest and Pikachu was of course there. He asked Pikachu to give him back the Pokehelper, but he said no, instead telling him to shut up, shut up, shut up, and that he had forgotten him. The game then cut to the bedroom. Pikachu was playing dead. Then a text box appeared that read, "Pikachu is dead." The screen then faded to black except for Pikachu's lifeless body. Text then popped up that read, I quote, "Pikachu was left alone for years in an empty world, a world he couldn't escape from. He waited for all these years for his owner or anybody to save him, but nobody came. All he wanted was for someone to play and care for him. Yet, he was left alone." In it too, Pikachu Story. This creepypasta comes from user The Dark Ones, who talks about discovering a DVD labeled Pokemon Pilot in a store's dumpster. He brought it home, hoping it would be some sort of joke by the employees, but alas, it was actually a Pokemon episode. However, this was a storyboard, so he figured it was some sort of unfinished episode that was likely scrapped. The episode was called Pikachu Story, and it began with the tribe of Pikachu sleeping in the cave, except for a Pichu, who was wandering around before falling into a river and drowned. The tribe found its body the next day. It was impaled and was partially eaten by maggots, and another Pichu stepped out. It turned out to be the dead Pichu's brother, and he decided he wanted to bury it. He dug a hole with the rest of the tribe and put him in. All but one Pichu left. The one remaining stayed at the grave for days on end, bordering on starvation. Out of nowhere, a human appeared, throwing a Pokeball at the Pichu and rushed it to a Poke Center to heal it. Nurse Joy healed it and the trainer took it home. The trainer then released it, but the Pichu was frightened and tried to attack, but was too tired to do anything. The trainer then donned a very sinister smile, picking up the Pichu and throwing him repeatedly against a wall. The trainer then put him in a box that was filled with skeletons and other decomposing Pichus. The next day the trainer took him out, biting off his ear before stomping on his head. The trainer then looked directly at the camera saying, "You shouldn't have watched this." And finally, in at number 1, Goodbye Pikachu. Now our final creepypasta is a long one, so bear with me. It comes from user Sayoto, who details their growing interest in Pokemon Nuzlocke challenges, aka if your Pokemon faints, they're dead. So they decide to whip out their Pokemon Yellow to play some of those challenges. They called their character Red and their Pikachu Pika, and of course they grew very fond of their characters. The user focused all their training on Pika, favouring their little friend over the other Pokemon on their team, going as far as to sacrifice those that could potentially harm him. They reached Elite 4 with their team and of course Pika. All of them trained to level 60 in order to beat the Elite 4 without too much hassle. However, things didn't go according to plan. When they tried to defeat Blue's last Pokemon, their Pikachu fainted. As they were doing a Nuzlocke challenge, it pretty much meant that Pika was dead. They were sad but defeated Blue nonetheless, and after, released Pika. Once the credits had played, they went over to Lavender Town to bury the little yellow friend in the graveyard to honour him. However, when they attempted to put Pika in the PC box, it let out a cry, which was completely normal. Pikachu would often complain, but when they tried to release Pika, they heard another cry, an angry one. Then a text box appeared, reading, "Pika is looking unhappy." The player then remembered you couldn't release Pikachu in this version of the game. Disappointed, but also happy they didn't have to bury their friend, they placed Pika in Bill's storing system and then left the Pokemon Center. The player then turned off the game and went to bed. All night they had weird dreams that they were standing on a ship with their rival Blue standing a few feet away from them. Blue then ordered his Pokemon to attack their Pokemon. They looked down, it was Pika. Pika was the only Pokemon standing in front of them. The battle then commenced. Pika attacked Blue's Pokemon, which quickly fainted, but that's not exactly what happened. It laid on the floor, bleeding out. Blue held it, tears in his eyes, before turning to the player shouting, "You will get what you give, Red." Confused as to why he called them Red, they turned around to find themselves in a white room that was completely empty, except for a mirror in front of them. Looking in it, the person they saw wasn't themselves, but was Red. The reflection was sad, even crying. The next few nights the player had similar dreams and quickly realised that Blue was wanting to avenge his dead Pokemon. He was attempting to kill Pika just like they had killed his precious friends. Then one night they had a dream. They were trapped in a dark room, and a voice echoed, "Wish you had someone now, don't you?" It was Pika. "Wish you hadn't abandoned me, don't you?" They turned around and there stood Pika, bruised and wounds all over its body. He said, "You came to me. Now we can be together forever. You'll stay here with me. I'm no longer locked in your PC. I'm dead, like you wanted me to be." They woke up, trembling, but thankful it was just a dream. They quickly turned on the Game Boy to make sure everything was just as they left it, but Pika was no longer there. Then out of their room they heard a sweet laugh, and then a voice utter, "Didn't you love me?" Alright, there we have it. What did you guys think? Were there any that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below, and while you're down there, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. And until next time, see you later.